Just before I call the meeting to order, I think perhaps Councillor Comfort is watching this. I just want to give Councillor Comfort a shout out. We're with you, Esme.
Yes, we are.
Go get them. With that, I'll call the meeting to order. Looking to the agenda, are there any changes, additions? Seeing none, I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Just before I move on, there was something at the end of the printed agenda that looked like an in-camera thing, but it has to do with utilities.
It's not in my agenda, Your Worship. Maybe it's a rogue page that got it inserted?
Agenda gone rogue.
Rogue page? Okay, I won't worry about it. Okay.
Does it have a page number on it?
Pardon me?
Does it have a page number that you're referencing?
No.
No?
Just a letter. It's like neatly bound into the agenda.
Oh, it probably is a mistake of the printer.
Yeah. Oh. Problem solved. Thank you, Mr. Fark. I wish it was always that easy, huh? Anytime I have a difficult agenda item, to worry about, I'll call you over. Okay, there are no delegations. Looking to the minutes, November the 20th, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Item G1, Climate Action Plan, Ms. Risling-Wynn.
Bam. Super. Good evening, Mayor Borman, members of council. I am here this evening to present to you again the Town of Canmore Climate Action Plan. You'll recall that I was first here in September and presented the draft to you. So tonight we'll be asking that council approve the Climate Action Plan for planning purposes. So just quickly to recap what's in the plan. So essentially there are three parts to the plan. The first being the inventory, which identifies our corporate and community emissions for 2015, that baseline year. The second piece is setting new targets for the corporation and the community. And then the third big piece of the Climate Action Plan is related to the actual climate actions. Again, both for the community and for the corporation. So briefly just to discuss what changes have been made to the Climate Action Plan since it was presented to you in September. Really just one minor change. The draft version stated that we would consider annual updates to the green building regulations, so a fairly specific piece. And in conversations with BODA, we have revised that to periodic updates of the green building regulations. So we, again, in conversations with BODA, determined that annually updating the green building regulations is probably unrealistic. It's a lot of work to do it. It's a statutory plan, so we know how that goes. And it provides too much uncertainty for the building and development community if we were to do that on an annual basis. So having periodic reviews of the green building regulations, while it's still necessary to do it, we don't obviously believe that it's quite necessary to do it on an annual basis. So that is the one minor change in the document since it was presented to you in September.
And when you say periodic, what are you thinking?
So, so for the time being, we do want to have a closer look at it because we did change the green building regulations in March of 2018, we do want to have a look at it at least in a year's time after it's been adopted to try and understand if it's working and perhaps make some tweaks to it at that point. But then once we've done that, I think, probably a period of 2 to 3 to 5 years that we would want to be looking at it. And as code changes as well, because there is the potential for Alberta Building Code and the National Building Code to change, and to update in terms of, if there's other regulations in place at a higher level that we may need to incorporate, but we would be looking to do that on 2 to 3 to 5 years, I would say, rather than making it a specific commitment to doing an annual change.
So it's the sort of thing that might come once per term to council?
I would expect so, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So just to dive into it really briefly again for you, the first piece was the inventory, which describes our GHG emissions measured for the community and the corporation, aggregated into 3 sectors, so buildings, transportation, and waste, and measured for that baseline year of 2015. So previous inventories really only looked at gas, natural gas consumption, and electricity. This new inventory that we've undertaken now adds transportation and waste, which weren't previously included in our earlier inventories, so that piece is making it much more robust. And our commitment to the Global Covenant of Mayors has certainly added a level of rigor that we hadn't incorporated into our GHG emissions in the past, and it is trending us towards more standardization of emissions reporting. So it's really nice to have our inventory sort of meet that global protocol now. So this is just a snapshot again of our the community emissions. So just shy of 275,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and 54% of our emissions in the community are related to buildings. So that's residential buildings, commercial buildings, institutional. 40% are related to transportation, and then the remaining is municipal solid waste and biosolids. On the corporate side, we are just under approximately 7,000 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, so that's about 2.5% of the community total. So if you took the community emissions, 2.5% of that is attributed to the town of Canmore, our municipal facilities. And it mirrors what we're seeing on the community side as well, so approximately 80% of our corporate emissions are related to our buildings. So the next piece in the Climate Action Plan talks about our targets, again for the corporation and for the community. The targets that are in the plan are both grounded in provincial actions related to climate change and federal actions as well. So they mirror what's happening both at the provincial level and federally. And there are big picture emission reductions in the plan, but there's also some more specific targets related to priority activities.
Just on that slide, so knowing political reality provincially and federally, what would you assess the likelihood of provincial and federal action, the targets there that we're referring to changing, and how would that, I mean, we don't want to change our approach or targets if a federal or provincial whim should take over. So we're not locked into the provincial and federal actions related to climate change, are we?
No, we're not. So this is really a standalone document for our local government, and it's up to us to decide how we want to proceed and the commitments that we want to make, irrespective of what may be happening at both the provincial and federal level. And we're seeing this across the country and frankly across all of North America, where local state governments are really taking the lead and actually doing the work, despite the fact that they may not have support from higher levels of government. So this is our own autonomous plan.
Right, and that reflects the whole initial intent of the Covenant of Mayors is to acknowledge and recognize that this kind of work has to start at the municipal level. We can't wait for the feds and states and provinces.
Yes, I think so, yeah. So representing 2015, so our baseline year. So for 2030, we're looking at a 30% reduction in community emissions, and then also in 2030, a 50% reduction for the corporation. And this recognizes that local governments do have more control and authority over our own corporate emissions, so that's why there's a slightly more aggressive target for ourselves. And then by 2050, we're looking at a 80% reduction both within the corporate and community emissions inventories. And then there's an additional piece in our climate action plan that wasn't contemplated in the previous work that had been done in the Environmental Sustainability Action Plan under the Energy and Climate Protection section, and that's to contemplate setting a renewable or low carbon energy target. So this has been purposefully left as a placeholder in the climate action plan. We do need to do some additional work around what that potentially could look like to try and understand, what should the target be and how are we going to get there. But we felt that it was important to signal that we did want to do that work and make that commitment. So therefore it's in the plan as a placeholder to indicate that we would like to move forward with that. So moving into the actions section of the climate action plan, there's about 60 different actions in there. So that's, really makes up the bulk of the rest of the report. And again, the actions are identified according to sectors. So there's actions related to waste, to buildings, to transportation, and that renewable low carbon piece. So obviously I'm not going to go through all 60 with you. I just wanted to highlight a smattering from each of them. So under buildings, we're looking at things like establishing an energy benchmarking program for buildings. We've previously talked about the PACE program, so this would enable us to move forward with that as well. So property assessed clean energy and potentially having our own bylaw that allows us to adopt a PACE program. Looking at things like energy audits and building recommissioning, and encouraging the development of green subdivisions. And what I mean by that would be looking at subdivisions in terms of, could they be photovoltaic, so PV, solar ready? Could they be EV charging station ready? Could they incorporate a district energy system or some kind of combined heat and power system? So looking at what's remaining to be developed in Canmore and trying to really push for some innovative adoption of energy efficiency and district energy type systems.
I'm interested in how we pursue that. Is that the sort of vision that could be adopted within an ASP? Or is it already being discussed with the Three Sisters on their new ASP? I mean, if we're going to do that, it has to start at a fairly high level.
Does anybody else want to answer that?
Anybody want to?
Anybody? I mean, I'm happy to, but
nobody wants to take that one?
So I don't know that it's something that we would necessarily include in an ASP level document, but it is something that we could look at potentially at the architectural guidelines or the engineering design guidelines, something along those lines as a more appropriate forum for that.
But wouldn't it make sense, let me rephrase that, it makes sense to me to include, at least as a visionary statement within the ASP?
We could consider that, and that could be useful feedback to provide during the ASP process.
Roger that. Thank you.
So under the umbrella of transportation-related actions, looking at continuing to invest in infrastructure such as separated bike lanes, multi-use trails, pedestrian-only streets, and this is, of course, supported by the Integrated Transportation Master Plan as well, so the plans align with one another. Looking at building out electric vehicle infrastructure throughout the community, corporately looking at accelerating the retirement of our less fuel-efficient vehicles, and things like allocating budget for snow removal on bike commuter routes throughout the winter. On the waste side, the big one is introducing an organics collection system. We can look at additional efforts related to construction, demolition, and renovation waste. Continuing to look at opportunities related to waste to energy within the community. And then things like looking at opportunities to reduce the community's food waste. So there's a number of initiatives already ongoing within the community. The food recovery barn, are there ways that we can work with those types of organizations to not just collect the organics at the end of the plate, but also to avoid food waste at the beginning of the system. And then, yep.
Just on the waste part, the further investigate waste energy projects within the community. So of course we're involved with the Sewa project, but that's not, would you consider that being within the community if it should ever come to pass?
Yeah, so within the community doesn't necessarily mean within the footprint of the
Physically
community,
within,
but yeah. So, I mean, we're working with EPCOR at trying to determine whether or not there's an opportunity for waste to energy on our biosolids at the moment. And potentially, if that pilot project were to work out, then that system could be incorporated at the wastewater treatment plant. So that would be an example of within the community, but think of it more broadly in terms of, you know, how can we deal with our waste potentially as an energy source, not just within the footprint, but synergies with other organizations, other municipalities, other enterprises that could be an opportunity for us. Great, thank you. And then the last piece is regarding again, the renewable low carbon energy target. So specifically, we need to consider setting a target for that and determine how those targets would be met. And if possible, collaborating with neighboring jurisdictions and possibly even First Nations. We would like to, again, introduce street and neighborhood designs to support renewable energy and consider regulating solar ready in areas where there is solar potential. Or EV ready with new construction. And then the other interesting piece is the idea of renewable energy certificates. So we have used these in the past to offset our corporate emissions. Up until the end of 2017, we offset 100% of our corporate emissions with renewable energy certificates. So do we want to contemplate that as being part of this mix as well? And I think there is some merit in giving that some consideration and establishing some guidelines about the type of rec that we would be looking at. Mm-hmm.
In regards to the top box on that, collaborating with neighboring jurisdictions and First Nations, I've read recently about Stoney Nakota's interest in building solar farms, and I know there's some work that has to be done in the First Nations there to make that happen, but it seems to me that might be a good opportunity if that should move forward. Has there been any, are you aware of any discussion between Town of Canmore and Stoney Nakota on that possibility or the support for a project like that? Mm-hmm.
I too am aware of the Chiniki solar farm that they're proposing, and haven't had any direct conversations with them myself. But I'm excited to see that opportunity coming within the broader valley. I'm not sure if any other staff have had any conversations with them, but it's certainly something that I think there could be some synergies there, and it would be exciting to be able to support them in some way.
Would be, and it's still in the political arena there, so it's a little premature, I suppose, but be interesting to keep tabs on that one.
Agree. So the recommended actions in Section 4 certainly serve as a shopping list, and town staff and other community stakeholders, we should really establish some priorities of the listed actions. And begin implementation as soon as practical. So some of these actions can be implemented quickly with minimal investment, whereas others have longer time frames, require higher levels of investment, may require more detailed implementation strategy with specific budgets and funding sources, timelines, and milestones. So business cases and detailed budgets would need to be developed for a number of the actions in the plan, and of course we would bring those back to council at the appropriate time during budgeting and to get your feedback and your approval for anything specific that required additional information. So the action plan is, though, developed as a standalone document. However, it's important that this type of mitigation is mainstreamed and integrated into the work that we do. So our strategies, our strategic planning, our policies, programs, and projects and administrative processes should be looked at through this lens of how does it contribute to the climate action plan, and how can we work towards those goals as opposed to in opposition to them, obviously. And then the last piece is it's not a static process. Things are changing all the time. Technology is evolving. We would like to be able to incorporate and utilize new information as it becomes available to us. So this is a preliminary first step on Canmore's journey towards our climate resilient future. And we need to be mindful that we do need to revisit it and revise and update as well, so that we can make sure that it's still meeting the needs of the community.
You're right, it's quite a shopping list. Section 4.
And alongside with that, obviously it's important for us to monitor our progress. So this is just, a snapshot of what it could look like. I'm not saying this is how it would be done, but, looking at ways that we can track and see, what have we done, what have we completed, what haven't we started yet, what's in progress, what are the hurdles and the obstacles facing those remaining actions. So we want to check in and make sure that we're actually making progress on this. And we want to develop some meaningful metrics that help us understand our progress as well. So, some things could be fairly simple and quite easy. So kilometers of bike commuter path, or amount of solar generation, number of solar panels on municipal facilities, those types of things. But then there probably will be some more complicated metrics that we may want to develop to describe our progress too. Yeah,
that'd be really, really great to have something like that online on our website, even as simple as that. But it's an important issue, and I think the community is behind us on moving forward with climate action plans. So I'm sure we can find an easy way of keeping it in front of the public.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, so with that, that's a pretty brief summary of the Climate Action Plan. And again, the request here before you today is that you approve it for planning purposes, and I'm also happy to answer any additional questions you may have.
And I have a few, likely there's others as well. Just in regards to the report, under the stakeholder engagement, you note that the building community they noted a perceived lack of market demand for homes which demonstrate enhanced sustainability features. That perception is entirely uninformed.
I'm not sure that they have, done any rigorous polling in terms of their membership, in terms of whether or not they're seeing people asking for this. But I know that within a broader building community that there has been interest expressed in having sustainable homes and more energy efficient homes. As far as specifically, has BOTA done any work within their membership to ask that question? I'm not sure, but they did have some reservations around whether or not the market was demanding it. But I know from looking at CMHC documents and other Alberta Green Building Association documents that the market research that they have done definitely indicates that it is something that's desirable to a lot of homeowners.
Great. I mean, bottom line is our society has to start moving that way, so whether there's any support for that perception or not, it's still something we have to be aggressive on, in my opinion. So on page 14 of the report, under renewable energy low carbon target, you note as one of the considerations is the spectrum of legal bindingness What does that mean?
So again, because this is our plan and it would be a local made in Canmore target and commitment, at this point in time, there is no legal requirement for us to meet a renewable or low carbon target. Who knows what the future legislative requirements may be, but certainly any commitments that we would make locally would be the ones that we would want to move forward on. Yeah, it's difficult to say what may or may not happen at the provincial and federal level, as we were talking about earlier.
That's really suggesting there may be some legal direction or some regulatory direction from senior levels of government that we would have to abide by.
Potentially, yeah.
I see. And in the climate actions for existing buildings, on page 16, the fourth box down is suggests initiate and earmark franchise fees and local access fees. So the implementation is to direct franchise fees and local access fees to a dedicated fund, etc. So is that specifically the Fortis and ATCO franchise fees that you're talking about there?
Yes, and so we have had that ongoing conversation about whether or not we would want to consider that at some point in the future. I know other communities have used those funds and dedicated them towards greenhouse gas emission reduction initiatives. So it's something that we may want to possibly consider at some point in the future.
Great, and the local access fees, I'm not sure I'm familiar with that term. What's a local access fee?
So I'm not totally familiar with how the franchise agreements are laid out. Perhaps Mr. Fark might be better poised.
I think Mr. Fark's asleep, so our conversation is kind of boring up here. So
I think it's just
Oops, was I paying attention? No, I was not.
I think it's another term for what we call franchise fees. The franchise fees are largely around access to the land, the municipal land. So it's a terminology, but as far as I know, it's not a separate thing. It's essentially our franchise fees. We can look into it more afterwards, but
I just
consider them the same.
That's kind of what I thought, but I thought maybe there was something else I was missing. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for the presentation. There's a whole bunch in here, 60 action items. I'm wondering if it makes sense, and your opinion on this, to minnow down what we're looking at and start with things that are attainable. I know we're looking at solar initiatives, and there's some good information about district energy that's happening in Calgary right now. You want to just maybe go over what that is? But minnowing down, not to try to do all 60 things. I think that's the intent, because there's a lot in here.
Yeah, for sure. And in the implementation piece, I think it will be important for us to prioritize what are the, to use a bit of jargon, the low-hanging fruit, and the things that we can do potentially over the next year that don't even necessarily have a budget allocated to it at this point in time. So identifying sort of the list, the short, medium, and long term, things that we can chip away at, again, that don't necessarily require additional financial resources, but would simply be staff time, and then things that we need to contemplate. Okay, this needs a budget and a business case built for it, and maybe a technical feasibility study. So those pieces would be shifted to more of a medium term. So it is going to be important for us to take that list of 60 and identify which are the ones that we want to tackle first, and then continue to chip away at. And then as far as the district energy piece goes, the NMAX District Energy Center in Calgary is a really innovative district energy system that has been built that really supplies space heating to that entire East Village development in Calgary, around Fort Calgary. So looking at those types of solutions, I think, could be really interesting for Canmore.
And we can take a look at that with new developments as they happen, as technology moves forward that way too, I suppose.
Potentially.
Good, thank you.
Yeah, let me just do something. I have to change the board over. So green subdivisions, that's, I've read a bit about East Village, and I think Cheakamus Crossing and Whistler incorporated some of that concept, and I know Scandinavia, it's been around for a long time. Just what I'm not sure about is how we would initiate that, unless it's in the regulations, which I wouldn't necessarily see it being. Again, that would be something that we would want to capture in a area structure plan, perhaps? Question mark?
I'm happy.
Mr. Fart?
Once again, that is something that could be looked at. I mean, the ASP is meant to give high-level policy direction, and so that is feedback that could be given as part of the ASP process and something we could look to incorporate.
And typically, in anybody's understanding or knowledge, is something like green subdivision something that the developer is 100% responsible for putting in place? And I mean, what sort of partnership would that look like? I mean,
short answer to that is I have yet to meet an altruistic developer. So there's always going to be a combination of incentives, bonusing, whatever it looks like, in order to make the balance. I mean, essentially the municipality has to make an argument to the developer that there's a financial incentive to engage in that type of development, and that's not going to come at no cost. So we don't have a mechanism to impose that type of development on the developer entirely at their cost. There's no legislation or no legislative framework that would allow us to do that.
Right. So, I don't know, I guess we can talk about it in the future. The two examples that we referenced, East Village and Whistler, were both government-led. Isn't that right?
That's correct. So Whistler was certainly led by the municipality in that case. And the East Village was I don't know if it was actually a P3, but it was a sort of, the municipality had a very strong role in it. There was a fair bit of private sector, but.
Yeah.
It provides space heating to Municipal Hall. So they were the first, I believe, anchor tenant as part of that system. And then as other developments developed in that area, they were tied into it as well. So they were certainly one of the main partners in the project, yeah.
Great. On page 20 in transportation, the suggested actions there, implementation, there's one that notes as part of developing complete neighborhoods to restrict single-use development on the outskirts. So in this case, are the outskirts Three Sisters and Silvertip?
Yeah, so those areas that, yeah, are would be on the urban growth boundary of the community, yeah.
And single-use development, to restrict single-use development, is that restricting like single-family homes, or am I misunderstanding?
No, it would be more, again, looking at complete neighborhood sort of design, so that there would be opportunities for people to walk and cycle and use alternate forms of transit, but also get some of their community needs satisfied in those neighborhoods as well.
So that's suggesting that there's an advantage or benefit to this climate change action plan to encourage commercial growth in the residential neighborhoods that are being or may be proposed out Three Sisters.
Where appropriate, yeah. I would add that caveat, yes.
Yeah. And on the next page, one of the actions under supporting an efficient transit service is to consider implementing a transit tax. What's a transit tax? And how do we do that?
So again, I mean, some of these actions, so you'll note that the language is non-committal. It would be consider. So looking at opportunities that, we would potentially look at our tax base and look at opportunities that we would allow to support local transit from that. So much bigger conversation about how we would go about doing that, but potentially something that we, again, may want to contemplate, thus use of the term consider.
Okay. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. In Vancouver, do they not have an initiative similar to that where they add an extra penny or two per litre, and that
They do.
supports enhanced transit within the metro area?
That's right, yeah. So you'll note that when you drive into the Lower Mainland, gas is slightly more expensive for that reason. So I'm not totally clear on or what the terminology that they use for it, but it is to utilize to support green transportation initiatives.
Yep. Gotcha,
Yeah.
thanks.
On page 23 of the report, there's some bullet points under mainstream implementation. The first one, well, the first two, talking about, using our own guiding documents, land use bylaw and the NDP, et cetera. So I think much of what you're addressing in the climate action plan, or some of it at least, is reflected in the current land use bylaw.
Mm-hmm.
So you've, I'm sure, had input to the bylaw, proposed changes with that perspective in mind?
Yes, yeah, so that's exactly what, when we use the term mainstreaming, what that actually means is to integrate it right into our strategic documents when they're being written, when they're being revised. So again, looking at it through this lens of our climate action targets and goals, and how can those plans further support that. And so the land use bylaw is a great example. The changes that we made previously in March to strengthen the green building regulation section. So that's a great example of how it's been already mainstreamed into the land use bylaw. And the municipal development plan too has language in it around sustainable communities and energy efficient homes and initiatives that support those strategic priorities as well.
I hesitate to bring this up, but I will. So, as you know, at first reading, was it first reading? Anyways, at some point we started talking about reducing the maximum size of housing, or reconsidering the current direction on that. In my mind, that would relate very directly to the climate action plan.
I would agree, yes.
You agree?
Yeah.
Great. And on page 36, this is something I didn't pick up on in previous discussions we've had about the climate action plan, but just an editorial change. There's a number of suggestions listed. The town council direct the general manager, the town council direct the manager of planning, etc. And of course we can't direct any of those people, so that
Right.
should all be
Yes.
changed in the final plan, directing the CAO to do these things.
Excellent point, thank you.
And the 2025 short-term community wins on page 26. On the building side, 300 homes retrofitted, 300 homes installing solar. So 2025 is 7 years.
Mm-hmm.
Seems like an aggressive target.
Certainly is, yes.
So
yes.
that's 50 homes a year on the average, or more than, I think. So we'll have to get going on that.
Yes, or we could amend it to something more realistic. Agreed.
Because I don't recall anything in the budget that might bring that to pass. And the last question I have is again, just for better understanding on my part. On page 35, right at the end, Appendix D, we talk about the Meets Coalition. And I'm not really sure what that is and how it fits in. Could you just really briefly?
Yeah, so this was just an idea that was brainstormed during the workshopping process, and so the consultants included it as really more for information of a type of program that could be utilized. And so the MEETS program is really geared towards more commercial types of buildings where the tenants and the building owners are collaboratively working on the energy efficiency of the building, and it's metered, and if you're part of the MEETS coalition, then there's a certain benchmarking that happens between buildings, so it sort of brings in that competitive piece where you want your building performing well in comparison to the peer type buildings within that portfolio. So it was really just an example of a type of program that could be utilized for those types of buildings.
Okay. Is MEET an acronym or something?
I believe it is, and off the top of my head, I can't. Thank you.
Say that again. Doesn't say that in here, but sounds right.
Metered energy efficiency savings. Oh, it's transaction structure.
Okay. No, that was pretty obvious from the acronym.
I think it's referenced in the report.
Okay, I'm sure it is. Thank you. Okay, great, thank you. Are there questions from other members of council for the motion? Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Rislingman, for preparing this very fulsome document. There's lots of good ideas in here, and I think the community is very interested in this subject right now, so this is very timely that it comes out. Under the implementation section, there are a lot of recommendations. So do you see these happening during budget cycles or as statutory documents are changed, or how do you see weaving these things into our process?
I would say all of the above, for starters. And again, I believe that, there's work that we can do which doesn't necessarily require additional financial commitment or resources to identify, what are the low-hanging fruit, again, that we can capitalize on to start moving in that direction. And then as we dig deeper into some of these actions that do require more, perhaps a feasibility study or a dedicated budget, we would certainly have to bring that back to council during budgeting. During the budgeting process. So this is going to be a long-term plan. So the idea isn't to do this work all in the next 2, 3, 5 years. Like some of this will be longer term than that even, so 10 to 15 years. And so, we'll be chipping away at it, and it will be necessary to have further conversations about pieces of it that we'll be looking to council for your feedback.
And do you see the solar incentive program continuing to the foreseeable future?
It's certainly part of 2019, and I think it will also depend on the community's uptake of that program. We've had really good subscription up to this point, and my hope is that it would continue into the future. And certainly for next year, it's what we're planning on doing. But beyond that, I can't really say. It'll sort of depend. I think it'd be good to see how much interest we have around it within the community for 2019 as a starting point.
And the town is considering very aggressive solar panel programs for our own municipal buildings in the next couple of years as well?
We do. We have plans to put PV solar installations on a number of our municipal buildings, and we have done the feasibility study to identify, you know, what that would look like for those facilities. So I believe it is part of the budget. Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's really important for you people out there to understand this is a 20 or 30 year action plan. It's going to keep being adjusted, and ultimately it's always going to come down to the council of the day. Councils are going to have to take leadership and support the actions and support. Community is going to have to support with taxes. So this is a long-range plan, but we got to go there. Are there other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thank you very much for the report and all of the work.
Thank you.
Look forward to next year when you can devote 100% of your time and energy to this. If the budget's approved in a couple of weeks. So then with that, I'll move the council accept the climate action plan for planning purposes. And I'll support the motion wholeheartedly. We've talked a lot, not just we up here, but we in the community have talked a lot about the urgent need to address climate change. And as we've been noting, it really comes down to political leadership, and particularly at the municipal level. So if we can get behind this, then all the other municipal leaders can, and maybe we'll get where we should get to as a species. Anybody else like to speak to the motion? Okay, and then I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G2, the FCSS and Bow Valley Parent Link service agreements with the MD of Bighorn. Ms. Brown.
I don't actually have a PowerPoint presentation for you today.
Pardon me?
I don't have a PowerPoint presentation for you.
Oh, come on.
Normally I do. Good evening, Mayor, members of Council. I'm here today to seek your approval for the renewal of 2 service agreements for another 5 years. And they are the Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn Bow Valley Parent Link Agreement and the Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn Family and Community Support Services Agreement. The original 5-year agreements were signed by both Canmore and the MD of Bighorn on January 1st, 2014, and they're due to expire on December 31st, 2018. Both Bow Valley Parent Link and Family and Community Support Services are excellent examples of how through relationships and intermunicipal community partnerships we can work together to ensure success for all residents throughout the Bow Valley. We know that people reside in a specific Bow Valley municipality, but they live throughout the Bow Valley. For example, children will attend school in Exshaw and then come here for high school in Canmore. We also know that on our own, Bow Valley municipalities are small, at least compared to the big urban municipalities, and because of our size, it's harder for us as municipalities to individually create all services and supports for all residents. By coming together with municipalities like the MD of Bighorn, the programs we can create can be more impactful. The Town of Canmore receives funding through a provincial contract to provide parent link services for the entire Bow Valley, including the Western MD. And we also receive a portion of MD of Bighorn's Family and Community Support Services, which is also a provincial contract, to provide FCSS services to Western MD of Bighorn. The most significant service that we provide to the MD of Bighorn is probably information and referral supports to residents. Gaining the knowledge and the expertise to make appropriate referrals takes a significant amount of time, relationship building, and a community awareness. It makes good sense from both time and economic perspective to share this expertise. Through these agreements, we are able to clearly share some of our information and referral expertise, as well as some other services, like a parent link drop-in program in Exshaw, which includes parent support services, administration administrating developmental questionnaires in Exshaw that guide referrals and supports to new programming for the entire Bow Valley. Exshaw has access to our neighborhood block party program, which increases informal supports and decreases the need for intervention services. Exshaw supports partnership and collaboration with other community resources like Canadians Rockies Public School Board and Early Childhood Development Coalition. And Exshaw residents, along with all residents in the Bow Valley, are welcome to access our community social development workshops and courses, which include things like women's self-defense through FCSS and bringing baby home through ParentLink. Our partnership with MD has been successful, and today I would like to ask you and to invite you to help us continue this success. So I'm here to request that Council approve the 5-year renewal of 2 service agreements: Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn Bow Valley ParentLink Agreement and the Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn Family and Community Support Services Agreement. Thank you.
Thank you. So in the report, under the financial impacts, you know that the Town of Canmore for ParentLink services provides $56,000 in addition to the provincial grant. Is that additional contribution also reflected in the MD's contribution, or is their contribution solely a factor of their population?
So our provincial grant is for the entire Bow Valley. So when the money that Town of Canmore has given us has helped supplement the ParentLink services we can provide across the entire Bow Valley. And some of it is through additional FTE in our summer, so we're allowed to do more summer support programming. And that, of course, has benefit to MD of Bighorn, but mostly benefit for all residents across the Bow Valley, including Canmore residents. MD of Bighorn is at the table for program development through ECD Coalition. They're at the table for, they help us provide space in Exshaw. They help coordinate activities in Exshaw that, so we, for instance, in the summer, we do something like ParentLink in the park. So we work with MD of Bighorn to make sure that we can do a ParentLink in the park in Exshaw as well as across Canmore and in Banff as well.
Great, and that $56,000 is over and above the provincial grant, though?
It is, yes. Thank you.
And in the MOA, Memorandum of Agreement, under definitions, it notes contribution shall mean the fees payable annually by the MD to the town as out. Oh, page, attachment 1, first page. So contribution shall mean the fees payable annually by the MD to the town as outlined in the agreement. But the only reference in the agreement is 5.3.3, which is the $650 annually for supplies, etc. So is it the funding comes from the province directly to the Town of Canmore?
That's right.
So we get the portion, or we get directly, without it having to go through the MD, the costs that are associated to delivery of the service in the MD.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
So the $650 annually for supplies is what's being, that's all that's being referenced in 2.1?
Yeah. So yes, the supplies and the space in Exshaw, as well as the participation in the ECD Coalition.
Great, that's what I thought. And just as an observation, if for any reason council weren't to approve the 5-year agreement, the agreement would continue year after year, but only on an annual renewal basis.
That's right. And then we can give 180 days notice to make any changes or amendments.
Thanks very much. Are there questions from our other members of council? Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify, because I don't think this jumped out at me earlier. So the town of Canmore contributes, in addition to the grant that we receive from the province of Alberta, $56,000 to support staff, additional staff and programming that benefits the whole valley. And so how does that work with the town of Banff?
So it's for our staff. It mainly goes to staff, wages and benefits, to make sure that the staff can stay on the town of Canmore's benefit program. How it works with the town of Banff is they don't do, because we're the fiscal agent for all Parent Link services, they don't have to pay for the staff proportion, but they have paid for upgrades to the Parent Link Center in and of itself. And then they've also offered us...
They did the gross motor play upgrades, is that what you mean?
The gross motor play is a town of Banff specific activity, but what they did is they upgraded our Parent Link Center, so it expanded significantly. It was bursting at the seams, so it went from, I think, you know, I actually probably better not give numbers, but it went from a small capacity to a much larger capacity.
Okay. So I guess I'm trying to understand. So we're contributing $56,000 to make sure that the program is robustly underpinned. That was the best thing I could do. I haven't had much dinner. And so, and the MD of Bighorn is contributing $650.
And space,
And space. But we're contributing space too.
And we're contributing space as well.
From an apples to apples perspective, there's quite a differential.
Well, the portion that the town of Banff put towards their development was, I think, over $100,000. And I mean, it is a town of Banff building, but we were able, it really expanded our space, and it really helped Parent Link services to be more impactful in the town of Banff. But how I think we think about it is, we do services and workshops and programs in both Exshaw and in Banff, but we really look at our staff as being a piece of our community development. We look at how do we take this money that we have from the province and the additional $56,000 that council has given to us for maintaining staff and benefits, and make sure that we're moving municipal priorities forward within the town of Canmore.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Brown. Just to clarify that, the MD also contributes to the FCSS programming, correct? More than $650 a year.
Yeah, but they're two separate agreements.
Yeah. So, okay, all right. So that's what the chart on page 3 is about, is the MD's allocation for the complete FCSS program. Okay. On page 50, well, 50 of my agenda, but, okay, so we're talking specifically programming that's under the FCSS, or is Parent Link a separate program from FCSS?
Well, they're two different services funded by two different provincial contracts. So the Family and Community Support Services is really that prevention-based services. And like we said, we use those services because we don't actually have staff for community development specifically. We use the funding that we get for FCSS services to do municipal community development. And then we get the additional money from the MD of Bighorn to make sure that we're doing services that they have access to. And that's the same thing with Parent Link.
Okay, I just wasn't reading separately as two separate programs, so thanks for that clarification. Thanks.
Just one other bit of curiosity in the definitions of the MOAs. Notes the MD Western population is the permanent population of the western part of the MD. Is it the federal census numbers that's used to determine that?
That's right. That's federal census numbers.
Right. So the federal census breaks out the MD population by region or district?
Yeah, and then we just take 65% of it.
Which is pretty much the same as all of our other service agreements. Great, thank you. Are there any other questions from members of council? Seeing none, thanks very much for your presentation. With that, then I'll move the council approve the renewal of two service agreements. First being the Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn Bow Valley Parent Link Agreement, and the second being the Town of Canmore MD of Bighorn FCSS Agreement. for a 5-year term from January 1st, 2019 to December 31st, 2023. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks for your work on that, Ms. Brown. Moving on to item G3, the council remuneration policy update. Remuneration.
What did I put?
Just a little in-council joke here. Sorry. Should have turned my mic off.
Sorry.
You gotta make your fun where you can up here.
All right, I'm ready. Sorry about that. Mayor and members of council, I'm before you today with two updates to two policies that we discovered during the budget process we wanted to bring to your attention. The first is the council remuneration policy, and the second is an amendment to the budget amendments policy. With council remuneration policy, we did identify with the new schedule of meetings that council has planned for 2019 an unintended impact on the basic rate of pay and the per diems for council. The procedural bylaw has historically limited meetings to 4 hours in length, and the previous schedule, or the current schedule that we're on prior to 2019, captured 4 meetings per month. What we identified with the new schedule is that there is a possibility for up to 22 hours or potentially more in regular meetings, and we wanted to just capture that difference. So it wasn't our intention to have significantly more meetings within that basic rate of pay. Having said that, we did, Municipal Clerk had a look through 2018, really looking at 2018 through the lens of our new meeting schedule, estimated that that might occur 3 times or so in a year, that we actually go beyond that 16-hour. So we're not anticipating that it happen often, but we did want to be fair and appropriate for when it might happen. I'll just show you, in our current meeting schedule, we'd identified for you the 4 Tuesdays in the month, each typically with that 4-hour time slot. Frequently, the 4th Tuesday of the month wasn't used for a meeting, or public hearings might be held at on those other meetings. With the new meeting schedule, we are moving on the 1st Tuesday of the month to an all-day meeting, holding the whole day, potentially for a meeting, holding the 2nd Tuesday of the month for a special meeting in the evening. Committee of the whole will be the 3rd Tuesday of the month in the afternoon, as it is now. And then holding the 4th Tuesday of the month again for a business meeting if required. So we go from potential of 16 hours of meetings to a potential of 22 hours of meetings. And so what we're proposing is that we make 2 changes to the policy. Now, the first being in the section under basic rate, and I've just captured the changes on the slide for you, as they are quite minor. So that would be updating item 2A under basic rate and changing regardless of the length of the time of the meeting to a maximum of 16 hours per month. And a second change falls in the per diem section of the policy, which would be section F, and would identify special council meetings over and above the 4 meetings, or a maximum of 16 hours of regularly scheduled meetings are covered by the basic rate, and then anything beyond that would be covered through the per diem program that we had identified. Councillor Hillstead noted an error in language. Thank you very much. Just wanted to draw your attention to that as well, and I have it noted on the motions here in sections 3 and 4 in the per diem. We talked about physical impossibility, and that was having councillors attend more than 1 meeting concurrently, which means at the same time. What we meant was consecutively, one after another. And that would apply then in item 3 and item 4 there.
Item
6, 3, and 6, 4, my apologies. Section 6 per diem,
3.
and then item 3 and item 4.
Concurrently.
No. So thank you, Councillor Hillstand, yes. If we figure that out, we'll really be very efficient, but we haven't figured that out yet.
Yeah, well, I've seen other councillors do that when I watched their council meetings. They're sitting here doing this, so they got another meeting going on somewhere else, apparently.
Yes. And that's it for the council remuneration policy. I don't know if there are any questions that I can answer for you. I do have the motions that I can put up. I know they're kind of weird looking question marks, weird, aren't they? Yes. But they are question marks.
Must be the European question mark.
Yes, there you go. That's why I wrote questions on the top, because I thought when I just had the question marks, we might not know.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Not so much questions, but I have observations. So, and I appreciate that the administration has recognized the potential impact to councillors' remuneration as a result of the changes we've made. But I also know that, I mean, typically, we don't come that close to 16 hours of meetings or per month, and you noted that it might be a few times per year. I mean, when I look through the past 3 months, we averaged 2 hours per meeting, which it'll be unusual where there's more than 16 hours in meeting time, unless things change dramatically, which is possible.
Yes. So from a process perspective, we are planning to track that time in Dayforce, which is our payroll system, and we are migrating all of the per diem. The per diem process is migrating to Dayforce in 2019, and we'll have the ability to track what that number of hours of meetings is that we're at. So we'll know at any given time throughout the month how close to that 16 we are, or when we have months where we may achieve that 16 hours, we'll be able to track that as well and then apply the appropriate per diem based on the additional hours of meetings per month that may occur. So it won't be you won't be required as council to keep track of that, but again, as you're pointing out, Your Worship, that does not happen that often. So,
yeah, great. I don't see this having any real significant impact to the budget.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. On the other hand, not on the other hand, but also, on the other hand, so in 6.1F, the old clause mentioned just special council meetings over and above the 4 meetings. So, given the historic experience, I mean, what did I say? Average of 2 3/4 hours a meeting or something. Arguably, 16 hours per month of meetings, given our usual average, would be 6 meetings. So, given that normally we're 2.5 or 2 3/4 hours in a meeting, it takes a lot of meetings to get to 16 hours. But the intent is then to keep the over and above 4 meetings. So what if the 4 meetings are less than 16 hours? It doesn't matter. Nothing's changing, really.
No, that's correct.
Yeah.
Nothing's changing. Yeah.
Yeah. So nothing's changing, but we're going to acknowledge that by amending the policy.
Correct.
Okay. Did you want to say something? Are there any questions for Ms. Rogers on this amendment? Councillor Sanford?
Worship. Thank you for that clarification. So this policy actually goes into effect on December 16th?
Correct. That is the first day of the first pay period of 2019.
Okay. So any per diems between December 16th and December 31st would be under this new rate, correct? Okay. And But we're not actually changing the meeting schedule till 2019 to
Correct.
reflect this policy.
That's right.
Okay, so it's just those 2
Sorry,
weeks.
it is a bit confusing, when the budget
Yeah.
year starts and when the payroll year starts.
Yeah, that's what I thought, and
yeah.
then, I mean, the date on here is December 16th, so I
Yeah.
thought you explained that,
Yes.
but there's 2 separate start dates for
Yeah.
each of
Payroll
those
year
things.
starts with any hours earned December 16th and on, because they're paid out actually in 2019. So they form part of the 2019 budget because that's when they're paid.
Oh, I see, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Are there other questions from members of council? See none, thanks for that report. And then I will move at this time that council approve the amended council remuneration policy AX-002 as presented. Any discussion on the motion? Seeing none,
Yes, Mayor Borelman, I'm just drawing your attention to the amendments that Ms. Rogers pointed out that Councillor Hillstead had suggested. Did you want to just specifically want to say as amended, or?
unless Councillor Hillstead wants to.
Or, yes, Councillor Hillstead
Formally
could move
make
those
that.
amendments potentially then.
Why don't you move that as an amendment? Councillor Hillstead,
I'll move the motion on the screen as amended, I guess.
an amendment to the motion?
Amendment to the motion?
Move the amendment to change the words concurrently to consecutively and non-concurrent to non-consecutive.
Okay, then discussion on the amendment. Seeing none, I'll call the question on the amendment. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And then back to the primary motion as amended. Discussion on that. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And G4, budget amendment policy FIN-001. Ms. Rogers?
I am back. Thank you. Administration is proposing one minor change to the budget amendments policy, in essence, to be able to address areas of contracted services. Our current process requires council approval for any cases where bringing contracted services, where we would propose bringing contracted services in-house. Sometimes doing that, we can actually save money. And the wording in the current budget amendments policy doesn't allow that type of change without coming back to council. And so we're proposing that in cases where there is not a budget or benefit increase, or there is a corresponding offset, that we would be able to make those types of changes with approval from the CAO. This would never apply in circumstances where there's a service level change or an increase to the budget envelope. Those would still be required, those circumstances, to come to council for approval. One example that I can share with you that we're working on that may make this make a bit more sense is around the area of tree watering services. So we currently, within our Parks Department, contract out tree watering around town. And our Parks Supervisor, Lisa Guest, has been working on a proposal, and she's just finalizing that work. Doesn't have it done in time for the budget, but is anticipating that starting in 2019, we could realize savings by bringing tree watering services in-house and having the Parks Department lead that. So we would see an increase in some hours of our seasonal staff in parks, which would be less than the contract we have for tree watering services. So in that case, we would say that would be a corresponding offset. We're seeing a decrease in actually the budget. And so then rather than going through the process of taking council time, administrative time to prepare a report and bring that forward, we're suggesting in the cases where it's neutral or an offset, that we would have the ability through CAO approval to make that type of a budget amendment.
That's a good example. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. So then how would that be presented when we look at quarterlies and we see a disparity in one line item over another? Would that be something that Mr. Irwin would outline to us and then?
Correct. Yeah. As a variance, we would identify, yeah.
Right, and then, so then when we have the budget presented to us, generally we see the past year actuals or near actuals in comparison to the proposed year coming. Would it also be highlighted as to why there's a difference in?
It would depend on the significance of the difference.
I'm trying to imagine a scenario. I just.
Sometimes this might be several $100s. It wouldn't be highlighted at that stage, certainly from a variance. But if we're talking about $5,000 or $10,000, that would certainly be something that we would speak to from a variance perspective.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
So in the example you used, that would affect essentially what's an annual contract. It's a contract that's written every year, or maybe for a multi-year term, but every year. Which is, that is a good example of how this would make sense. But then there's the other possibility of a term contract. For instance, the term contracts we have in the planning department or engineering department. Is there likelihood of that sort of a contract being considered under the same? And this is, I guess, a question for the CAO, because it's ultimately her decision. You know, if we take a, say, 1 or 2 year term contract in engineering or planning where there's quite a salary associated, and if that contract becomes part of the regular operation, then that affects every operating budget from then on, whereas the contract position is approved essentially each year.
So every situation would need to be looked on its own. So in the situation that you're describing, where we've had a term position approved, if we use the example of this year, for example, where we're intending to use operating reserve funds to fund those positions, then no, we wouldn't have had approval for ongoing positions beyond that term. So we wouldn't approve bringing them in as full-time permanent employees, because we haven't. That's not the intent of that contract. You know, another example that we just did recently was economic development. We used to have a contract for economic development. Bringing it in-house was actually a service level change. So that wouldn't be something that I would, you know, just agree to, because I see that as a major service level decision that we would want council to approve. So that, no, we're not talking about those kinds of situations.
Assessment services is another example where it was a significant service level change that would, in this case, still have come forward to council.
So the key is the change to this level of service.
Yeah, and the ongoing nature of the position. Yeah.
Sorry?
And the policy currently outlines that service level changes require council approval. So we're not suggesting any change there. That would continue to be the case moving forward. The tree services is a great example because there isn't a service level change. It just is in doing that work ourselves, we can save some money. Same number of trees need to be watered the same amount of time.
And the economic development is another good example of how it would relate to the policy. What about in engineering though? So Mr. Birch was contract position dedicated to or resulting really from the work on flood mitigation. No, something else.
So we had a municipal engineer position, and then we were unable to recruit successfully when that position came up. So Mr. Birch's qualifications were as such that there was benefit to the municipality to retain his services. So we entered into a contract, and when he has retired, we were able to this time successfully recruit for a municipal engineer, and that position has been reintegrated.
Right, so it was an FTE that was filled on a term contract, and it's an FTE again.
Yep.
Thanks for that reminder. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship.
So just something that came to mind. So in the case of summer parks employee, they are generally, their office is the great outdoors and occasionally the lunchroom upstairs. So when this is considered, is it going to be from a financial benefit? If it was, in the case of contracting out, is a little bit different than bringing a outside contract in. So is the whole going to be considered in terms of expense, not just the cost of their salary, both
Correct.
sides of it, but we have to, an office is required, computer access is required, all of those things, that is an additional, it could be an
Yes.
additional expense to the organization.
Yes.
Is that going to be part of that overall consideration?
Yes, it would be.
Because,
Yeah, that's part of the total cost. So
yeah, I just want to
can-
make sure
yeah.
that that's part of that,
Yes.
what that total cost means. Okay.
I have seen the preliminary work, I guess, or approach that Ms. Guest is taking, and she certainly factored all of that
All the pieces
into that. What are the uniform costs? In her case, there aren't
Right.
offices, as you've pointed
Yeah.
out. But what are the total costs? Because otherwise it wouldn't be a fair comparison. So the total cost of having that contract, and then the total cost of bringing that in-house, if there's any equipment, staff time, uniform, and then doing that determination, are we saving money? Does it make sense to do that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just as an observation in the attachment, which is the amended policy, and I missed this or didn't notice it during agenda review, but it's not exactly,
No, you're right.
pardon me? It's not exactly a red line version.
Because there was that one sentence change, so I've
Yeah.
highlighted in blue where the change was, that's the only change
Yeah,
in
but,
that
I
policy,
mean,
but
the
it's
red
not
line-
exactly,
Red line would have had the old wording
Yep.
struck out.
yep, my apologies for that.
That's okay, and it's not that important, it's just, so the original wording was the total cost for salaries, wages, and benefits does not increase. And the proposed change there is the total operational budget remains neutral or results in a savings, so
Yep.
same intent. Are
Same
there
intent.
other questions from council at this time? Seeing none, thanks again for your report. This time then, I'll move the council approve the amended budget amendments policy FIN-001 as presented. Is there discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Thanks for the work on that, Ms. Rogers. And I'll move the council be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously.